Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. In this episode, I interview Brandon Leopoldus. Brandon is the founding attorney of Leopoldus Law, a sports and entertainment law firm using the subscription model. Brandon discusses his uncommon path to becoming a licensed attorney, which foretells his decision to challenge the status quo in how he bills his clients. He shares important insights into how he has been able to provide legal services to athletes often overlooked by traditional law firms, and how he analogizes the price of his services relevant to the market he is serving. Thank you to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes and more on them later. You could sign up for the waitlist for my subscription seminar at subscriptionseminar.com. Please share this podcast with someone you know who would be interested in it. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Brandon Leopoldus, thank you so much for coming on Law Subscribed.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy we got connected from Sam of My Legal Academy. And before we get into your innovative take on sports and business law, tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I don't have that traditional legal path. You know, I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't want to be an attorney. Sometimes I still don't want to be an attorney. But you know, oftentimes people wanted to be an attorney when they were a kid or had a friend or a relative that was. I didn't have that. I grew up in Colorado, and I thought I was going to be a quarterback of the Denver Broncos. And when you're gifted with my athletic ability, you stubbornly find out real quick that you're not going to have that career option. But my sister was an athlete. She was an Olympic level gymnast, the first elite gymnast level of elite in Colorado, in the state of Colorado, which is helpful when we're in Colorado Springs and she gets to train at the Olympic Training Center. Mm-hmm. I'm a couple years younger than her, and my parents did either a very good job or a very bad job, I'll let you decide, on making sure that I didn't feel any different than her. And so I'd go play, you know, Little League baseball in my big weird foam hat and the plastic cleats, and then we'd go pick her up at the training center. And while we were waiting, I'd go play basketball on the Olympic basketball court in my Little League uniform, and nobody ever told me I couldn't do it. Yeah. They just let me do it. And so you'd walk around the USA boxing gym and, you know, start hitting stuff and pushing buttons and doing all the things that kids probably shouldn't do. But I felt like we were the same level. And it really didn't hit me until high school, which says something a lot about me, where she's getting recruited as the number one recruit in the country. And I start to realize things are different, right? We're not the same level of anything. And so I figured if you can't beat them, you might as well yell at them. I got cut from my high school baseball team, so I started umpiring and started umpiring Little League baseball, really enjoyed it, had no idea what I was doing, and started climbing the ladder of umpiring because I didn't want to work at like a Wendy's, right, in the summers. Instead, I was going to go work Little League baseball, probably pull home just as much money as my friends were, but I was outside for 2 hours and, you know, pulling in $20 a game. I was raking it in. And I eventually started working high school games before I was graduating from high school. And so I guess I had some modicum of talent, but ran into some AAA umpires in Colorado Springs. It's my hometown. And they said, you should go to umpire school. And I said, well, that's great. What's umpire school? And so I spent a year in college. And then I told my parents I was dropping out so I could go pro, which is a really cool thing for a 19-year-old kid to think to say. It's a whole nother thing to tell that to your parents when it's umpiring. It's not going to the National Basketball Association. Right. And so, I do that. I go to umpire school. It's kind of like umpire boot camp. And apparently you can scream at me and I can still do my job, which is, you know, pretty good for an umpire. That's what you need. And they start with, this is a baseball. This is what it's made out of, you know, and they're going to test you on it. And then they're testing you on the rules, which honestly read a lot like, you know, a law book or a case, you know, some statutes or a case or something like that. So I get into the minor leagues. I'm 20 years old. I'm running around the country thinking I'm a rock star, you know, in these tiny little towns, and had a really fun experience where I had seen the high level amateur stuff and watched my parents stress out about, you know, how do we pay for this? How do we, you know, do we send her to the right camp? How are we going to help her pick her schools? Because, you know, couldn't look everything up on the internet. We're looking at glossy magazine that the the coach from the University of Utah gave us or something.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm, working these long seasons where you'd watch, sometimes you'd have these Hall of Famers that had some problems off the field.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a lot of guys that are chasing a dream that just wasn't going to be their reality. And you'd have a pitcher that's getting divorced over the phone 2 hours before he's got to go pitch. And you're watching all of this go down, realizing that it's not as glamorous as everybody thinks it is. And it's a job.
Mm-hmm.
And that career came to an end shorter than I wanted it to be, but I was in the minor leagues. I became a suspect rather than a prospect and got released. But I was glad looking back on it now that I had that experience, but I didn't get the taste of the major leagues, because that once you get infected by the major leagues, you want that drug 24/7. And so for me, it was great because I had a modicum of success. I know what it takes to get to the big leagues. I just didn't happen to end up there. And so when I got released, I finished school. I was scouting, and a general manager of the Rockies at the time, we were in Colorado Springs. I was hounding him for a job, and he told me that if I was going to apply, I might as well go to law school. It seems like everybody else that applies has been to law school. So naively, I just do that. Right. I didn't call my sister who went to Penn State and was an All-American and just happened to be a lawyer. She's just good at everything she does. I didn't call and ask her what she thought. I just signed up for the LSAT and end up going to law school in San Diego, and ran across a ball player that I had in the minor leagues at one of the hotels. I was just hanging out with the umpires, and we start talking. He had signed a huge deal for $60 or $70 million. And he starts telling me about some of the stuff that goes along with that, the problems, because I've known him. He's not trying to, buff out his chest. He's telling me like, man, it's really tough because everybody's chasing me now. Now the motivation changes. It's just a different world. And as I'm talking to him, I thought, man, that gap that we have between one another, that knowledge gap, is huge, but I think I can help solve his problems. I don't know how. I'm still in law school, but I figure I'm just going to stick to the same industry that this is all I've really known.
I was going to say naturally you became a space lawyer. No.
Yeah. So
sports law.
So I went into wills and trusts. Yeah.
Right.
I figured I'll just stick to sports. It was great because I didn't think of sport. I thought, like everybody else does, you're either a general counsel or an agent. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of extra space there. And so, I go and start working for a non-sports firm here in LA. And then I eventually went out on my own, which was not the greatest idea. I didn't know how to run a business at the time. But several years later, I had gone back into a firm and realized pretty quickly there's a better way to do business. Mm-hmm. There's a way to do business for this space specifically that can be more efficient and actually address what the clients need. And honestly, I think it takes that lifetime of just at least a touch point and understanding of it to really understand why they need that and what they're looking for. The clients in the space. And so that's kind of how I cut my teeth and got to where I am. It's kind of a weird story. Nobody says, what umpire school did you graduate from? Nobody asked me that in law school. That wasn't a prerequisite.
Man,
I didn't care what my GPA was.
My first job ever was a little league umpire.
Yeah.
But when I was doing it, like they couldn't pay us in cash or anything because it was like labor laws. Like I was like 12 years old. Like I was young. Right.
Yeah.
And so my dad had to shepherd me everywhere. So they gave you these little certificate things that you got to exchange for money. And that was how we got around labor laws back then. Now you have to be 18 in the state of Illinois to be an umpire.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is, our careers took very different paths. But interestingly enough, we both got some business savvy and ended up doing subscriptions for our legal practices. So I think that's it. We've solved the problem. If you're listening to this and you're in high school, become an umpire, and that's how you become an innovative attorney. So, I mean, in hindsight, though, Brandon, like it does make sense, right? Like your path. You have the umpire background, you had the sports exposure, you knew that industry. And I was just talking with Robert Ingalls of Law Pods. And so he's a lawyer who left law to do podcasting for lawyers. So he knows law. And so when his clients are attorneys to help them with podcasts. So you, having been an umpire, having been in sports, having that experience, now doing what you're doing, I mean, it does make ultimately where you landed makes perfect sense, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and that's been a lot of fun where I haven't had to change anything, right?
Yeah.
The things that were important to me when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old and what are important to me now, the names have certainly changed. My experience and relationship to those things has changed, but it's still the same stuff. Like, I don't feel like I have a before and after period of my life. It's just a constant flow. And that's been a lot of fun.
Right, right. Um, I think some important takeaways for my listeners, because my listeners, they're attorneys who maybe want to go solo, or they maybe want to change
Sure.
the way they're practicing law and use a subscription model, or do practice law differently. What were some of those business lessons that you learned? You started your own practice, you failed, you went to work for somebody else, but then started it again. So like take us through some of those lessons, and how was it that you even came to the subscription model as one of the ways that you could practice law?
Yeah, I think when I first started out, I went out on my own after 2 years and one day of working at a firm. Nobody in the sports world wants a 2 year and one day attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was mistake number one. But the thing for me when I started out was I just assumed because I was a lawyer, I was going to have business because that was what I was, kind of exposed to in law school. They don't teach you about running a business, but also when I was a kid, I didn't know any lawyers. And so all the lawyers that I had come across always seemed to be doing well. So I just assumed you're a lawyer, people just find you. I didn't know. I didn't know about, Yelp or Google ads or any of this stuff. I didn't know. Why would I know that? And so it was a long learning curve to realize that I wasn't running a law practice. I was running a business that, just happened to be selling legal services, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. And so that was one of the first big hurdles for me because I was stubborn thinking that there's something wrong here. It must be the address, must be a logo, must be all the stuff that doesn't necessarily matter.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went into a firm, I realized that, litigation model is different than a transactional model, right? The business may be the same, but it's a different flavor sausage and you're doing something different. But, when we're trading time for money, there's a legitimate cap on what you can generate throughout a year. Until you fall down, there's only so many hours in a day that you can legitimately bill and, fall over into a bed or go to a beach and drink Mai Tais for the 3 days that you get off a year.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started this version of my practice, one of the things I knew was that when I file, say, an LLC, I know what I'm doing. It's going to take me an hour to write the operating agreement with some software and just get that done, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the most lucrative thing I could possibly do. I'm charging $2,000 or so for filing an LLC. That's a pretty good return on investment there. Because if I'm billing by the hour, I'm not making any money. And people are accustomed to paying a higher premium, especially in this space when it has to be tailored a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to look at that, that was when I first started to think, I don't necessarily need to do all of this work myself. If I'm writing the same operating agreement the same way for 90% of my clients, I need to automate that because it doesn't make sense for me to sit down and work hard just for the sake of working hard. Just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I started to notice those things that I do repetitively, I started to look at how can I make this so I don't have to do all of the work. Now, it doesn't take away 100% of it. I'm not, roaming the country, visiting, historical sites or anything. That would be a lot of fun. I still have work to do that I just can't automate yet.
Mm-hmm.
But you start to notice those things. And if you can get somebody else to do it, that's one way. Or automation is also key. And so those are the things where I started to look at a subscription model because with young athletes that are coming out of college, going into the pros, they need certain things at certain times, right? They graduate college or they declare for the draft. They're going to need an LLC. They're going to need reviews of their advisors that they're going to hire, their
Mm-hmm.
agent, their financial advisor, their CPA, maybe an estate planning lawyer, those type of things. And they all happen to give or take the same time period. And so about 2 years into my process of working alone with athletes as a solo practitioner, we started to realize we know what the workflow looks like. And so in my case management software, I would have that workflow ready to go and you just click on it because that's the next thing on the list. And it was amazing how every single athlete seemed to follow the same path. There may be a one-off here and there because something weird happens, but 90% of it is, set it and forget it type stuff. You just click the button when you need it and out it pops. And that made a lot of sense. The clients seemed to like that a lot more rather than me saying, yeah, give me a week and then it's 10 days later and you're stressed out and they're stressed out. Makes it a lot easier when you're able to do that. And so when I know what a client's going to need, say that first year, maybe that second year or third year of the relationship, well, I know how much time that should take me. And I shouldn't be incentivized because we have this relationship of billing by the hour, makes us almost incentivized to be less efficient with our time, which is very odd. So instead, why not charge a flat rate where they understand what that is? Oftentimes it can be less than the car payments that they have, right? It's certainly less than rent. And so imagine these, fifth, sixth round picks that are sitting on the bench. It's not LeBron James, but it's that guy at the end of the Lakers bench that might get 3 or 4 minutes a game where he's paying, $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month if it's really, really intensive for just about everything he needs on a business perspective. That's a pretty good, he's got the best price in town. And I have longevity of a client where I'm not selling something that's $1,000 a month. I'm selling something that's $12,000 a year.
Right. And then you're talking about lifetime value too, which is more common parlance in the software business, where not only is it $12,000 a year, but it's also how long is he going to need those services? How long is he able to play and needs those services? And also, if he does hit it big, you're his lawyer. And so now instead of charging $1,000 or $2,000 a month, you could charge him $5,000, $10,000 a month because his legal needs go up. So it's legitimate, but he's used to you and he's used to paying you. So like the opportunities keep opening up if you're able to develop a relationship with your client where they're not afraid to call you.
That's right. And the funny part is, and I think everybody's been around sports at some level, whether you like it or not, whole different story. But athletes typically, they have a couple things, right? They have the loan out company. They might do some endorsement deals. That's great. We just have checklists and we run it through our system so we can kind of review those contracts. Makes it a lot easier. But then they also do those kids camps, right? They have other things that they do. Oftentimes they have outside business interests that are not, Steph Curry and his investment fund. It's more of, what? They want to open up a restaurant. Bad idea. Don't open up a restaurant if you're an athlete. But oftentimes they want to do that, or they want to invest in their sister's business, or their brother has this funny idea that you can't talk them out of not investing in.
Right.
And so you get this kind of spider web effect where setting up a kids camp, I will tell you, is not that hard once you've done it 2 or 3 dozen times. And so when that athlete gets to that first or second off season and you say, hey, instead of teaching at everybody else's camps, why not have your own? Right? Maybe this is the money that we can use to invest for your sister. Okay, that's legitimate because now it's not money out of their pocket. They're going to make that money that they can use later on, and it's goodwill. They get to give back to their community, all of the kind of the feel-good stuff. Right. But it doesn't cost them a whole lot of extra money because we've already done it. We already have the templates. We just need to fill in the customer information, the client information, the dates, the times, all that, and get it out the door. When we can provide value to a client that they're making money, I don't know a lot of lawyers that make their clients money, but when you do, they will follow you around the rest of your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the subscription model lends itself well to that.
Yeah.
And I can't help but see even a better version of what I'm doing with the subscription model with what you're doing, because you found such a great narrow focus, right? Because I built a subscription to serve the latent legal market at whole in the state of Illinois. And that's a big task. You found a way to serve the latent legal market of athletes who don't need or can't afford, because they're not bringing in millions, the big expensive lawyers, for all that stuff. So like there was a legal need there. They still need lawyers and they're making good money.
Yeah.
And so but lawyers who charge by the hour charge a premium and are therefore inaccessible even by well-paid athletes who might not be the stars, right?
Yeah.
So there's, it's like that kind of thing is like what my listeners need to take away is find your version of that and use predictable, transparent pricing. And you can find success as an attorney. Like that, I know we're early on in the interview, but like I feel like that's the biggest takeaway. Now, some of these athletes that you're representing, are you like the first lawyer that they've ever hired, or have they hired lawyers before? Like, what has that been like for them? Because I do want to ask what your client's opinion has been on the model, but maybe that's the only model. They're like, well, this is just how lawyers charge because Brandon's been my only lawyer.
Yeah, so typically either the first lawyer they've ever hired, certainly the first they've ever hired, or if I get them later in their career, maybe they've had one before, but they don't really have a relationship with them because typically an agent's going to be that gatekeeper, maybe a business manager if they're a basketball player. But I want to get these kids when they're in college, now that they have NIL money that they can make. But I go through trainers, right? I have a lot of trainer clients that they're working with these guys for the NFL combine or the NBA combine or off-season workouts. Now, they don't know who the heck I am. And why am I hanging out in the gym with the trainer? But when the trainer says, hey guys, this is my guy, you should talk to him. He knows everybody, or he knows what you guys need to do, because I've had those conversations with the trainers. And the trainer, interestingly enough, is the person who knows everything about athletes. It's not their agent. It's not their mom. They tell their trainers everything. And I don't know why. But so when a trainer tells me, hey, this guy's got, some issue, or this guy's agent's not calling him back, and they eventually open up to me, I understand a little bit more about what's going on. So when they're always afraid lawyers cost a bunch of money, because we cost a bunch of money.
Yeah.
But when we sit them down and we talk about, look, here's some things we can do early on. Here's the cost. We're upfront with it. We don't hide that. We don't say it's in the engagement agreement. Take a look at it. We say, let's get the big thing out of the way first. I know you're worried about cost. Let's talk about what this looks like. And I typically walk through, this is what the next year or two of your life is going to look like. And here's how we can help every month or every stage of this career. Because oftentimes during a football season, I can't help you beat the Cincinnati Bengals. That's not my job, right? I know how to sit on a bar stool and watch you do your job. That's as good as I get at football. But what I do know is that some players want to have a weekly or a bi-weekly call. Some people during the season, they just want to be left alone. And that's okay. We can work our way through that. But if we say, here's when you set things up, this is how we set it up. And oh, by the way, you don't even have to call me. I'll give you a link if you want to see the documents, right? Because we do the client portal for these guys. If you have something you need, you fill out one intake form and we handle it. It gets put in there. You'll get notified. And when they see that, they'll always say, well, how much is this? And typically we can relate it to something that they're doing. It's going to be half of what your rent is in whatever city they're playing in. It's, a little bit more than your Range Rover car payment. And they go, okay, that's not so bad. Right. No. And here's what it equates to. Here's the stuff we can accomplish. Now we talk about the limitations, right? I'm not a estate planning attorney. They don't get, free litigation work. That's not what we're about. But we talk about setting them up for strategic growth in the business sector, utilizing their, name, image, and likeness, whether they're a professional or a college player. And so when we put those guardrails around it, we also tell them, look, we're going to have a discounted rate should you need other stuff. We'll extend that rate to their family, not so much their friends, because we don't know the friend situation, but their family. We kind of understand. We've worked with enough athletes to understand what mom and dad or sister, brother are probably going to need, just judging from whatever circumstance they come from. If mom and dad, have really great jobs and they're really great people, typically they're going to have questions about maybe a lease agreement or something, the pipe bust or the contractor did something screwy. Okay. We can walk them through some of that. It's not, not rocket surgery here, but if we have some kids where, dad's in and out of prison, this happens, right? Or sister is just falling on hard times and she's just got a lot going on. That may actually be more expensive for them. But we have those resources where we can put them in touch with good people to do those things.
Right.
And we're not going to send them to the folks that are going to charge an arm and a leg. We're going to send them to the people that, one, relate to them really well. And that when we make that referral, we know what those people are going to do. And it's going to make everybody look good.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSubscribed at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney, or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form at scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show. Yeah, and that is a problem I'm trying to solve with this podcast, right? Is like if clients come to me and it eventually is a problem I cannot solve. Well, how do I know who to send it to that has affordable, predictable pricing? Because that's why they hired me in the first place, right? Well, those attorneys don't really exist, so I'm aggregating them on this podcast and hopefully inspiring more. But you used an analogy that I think is another really important lesson and takeaway. Is you talked about half the price of your rent or less than a Range Rover car payment. Like that's an important analogy to make at whatever price that you're charging that makes sense, right? So take that, extrapolate it to your practice, listeners. For me, my entry level price, of course, this is just they get access to things and they get access to basic legal advice. It's $20 a month, right? So like I'm not doing nearly half of what I'm not even doing probably 90% of what you're offering at your subscriptions at my $20 a month package. It's very limited, but I analogize it to Netflix. Maybe you have a paid Zoom account. That's $15 a month, right? So like I'm trying to get subscribers coming into me at that level, analogizing it to those types of services. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to get some quick legal advice for the same price of a Netflix subscription? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm doing the same thing, but at a different level for a different market. But those are the types of things that you need to do when you're offering predictable, subscription pricing. You mentioned some other keywords: client portal, practice management software, automations, right? So like it's okay. In the future, they may sponsor this podcast, so you could drop some brand names. It's acceptable. And so like what are sort of the client portal solutions, practice management, automations? Like what tools are you using right now? The subscriptions that power your practice.
Yeah, great question, because these always change.
Mm-hmm.
I have a million of them, and some of them go and get replaced, and others stick around. I use Google Suite for just about everything because it's wonderful and it works great. I use Zapier integrations for everything, and if you don't understand Zapier, hire a virtual assistant that does, and they will make it work. I use Panther as my practice management, or my CRM practice management software. They have a client portal, and I think that connects with box.com. It's either Box or Dropbox. I have them both. I use Google Drive for everything as well. That integrates as well. That's kind of the client forward facing stuff. Still have DocuSign, even though Practice Panther has a signature portion of it. It's mainly because I just haven't checked it out yet. It's on my to-do list. So maybe DocuSign goes away, maybe it doesn't, but people understand how to use it. So I think any of those are good. I'm kind of brand agnostic to those signature programs. And then we've started to build some stuff in-house. What we're looking at with Google and Google Sheets and Zapier integrations is simply using a jot form to have them fill out, for example, if they're going to do an operating agreement, because we've walked them through and said, hey, here's what you need. It might not be them that fills it out. It might be their CPA. It might be their financial advisor. It might be mom that fills it out. But if we say this is what we need to do for a operating agreement for your LLC to get all that off-field revenue to come in so we have a business, they understand enough about it where they can say yes, no, or I don't know. Because if they don't know, we understand where they're going with it. And what we're really doing with those jot forms is buying participation. We're trying to educate the client and the people around them and give them some of the choose your own adventure materials. So that way we can all get to that final resting spot where we have that final document. They know what's in it. We know what's in it. And any of those question areas, we know that that's something that we can go ahead and implement into our strategy sessions with them and educate them on each of those questions. Mm-hmm. What I find really interesting when I first started this was that was the biggest heavy lift that I thought we were going to have, is the automation side. Was I had to put aside a whole Saturday and then a second one and a third one because I didn't start. I thought it was going to be the biggest, scariest thing in the world. And 4 hours later it took me 3 months and 4 hours because I finally got to it. And I went, oh my gosh, I should have done this forever ago. I could have hired somebody to do it, but I wanted to do it myself.
Yeah.
And it was amazing how quickly you can pick stuff like that up. And then when you don't know how to do it, you just find somebody that has an answer and you have them do it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time. These things have been around in other industries for a long time. And the practice of law is notoriously slow. I mean, I just faxed something to the IRS today. I faxed it. That's silly for me to still say in 2023, but we're still working with some of those systems. So you can imagine how most of our profession doesn't really understand that stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you sign up for anything, even my dog's veterinarian, they have the automated emails and I can, say yes or no or cancel the appointment without ever talking to anybody. Right. Even with you had sent me the reminders. I assume that those are automated reminders and it's great. That's what we should all have. Yeah. And as we start to integrate these things into the practice of law, we just have to treat it as a business that just happens to sell legal services.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about default settings for the tech that you're using for that, because the Calendly default settings are, I think it's like, 24 hours reminder and then like a 15-minute reminder. And those are fine for me because what if I get 20 reminders, I might just not show up because you sent me 20 reminders. So like find a balance. But those were default settings that I've accepted. I'm one who doesn't like to accept default settings. Obviously, you and I don't just accept the status quo, right? But it happens to be that those are really good ones. So I've never even had to go in and build those automations. It's standard. And so for my clients and for Law Subscribe, for the podcast, for it's all in there. I do want to follow up on the automation side for like the document drafting. So that is an in-house tool that you're building, or you're using a third party for the document automations?
We used Wealth Counsel. They have a business docs program. Right. And so I really like it. It looks like it was built in 1994 but it works. Like, why fix it? It's great. But
so it's quick thing. I can't help myself. First of all, because they're great, but they also sponsor the show.
Awesome.
I think they built their own custom solution, but 650 is the business doc and employment doc side of things where they come with their forms. But since you've been practicing for a while, it sounds like you're using your own forms. Gavel, which used to be Documate, they let you set up all your own automation. So instead of having to do a jot form and zap it over into Wealth Doc or Business Doc version of that, you build those forms in Gavel that then go to your client. And then when that client does something, like it's like in all of their forms. So like if you want to talk about, it's really incredible. And there is an ad. There's going to be an ad when this episode goes live, but here's another one. Law Subscribed, one word, saves you 10%, Brandon.
Nice.
So you could get
I'm writing all this down. This is great.
You get a discount on Gavel. And Gavel also has a free trial. So like you could build out an automation in Gavel and see if you like it. But if you use Law Subscribed, you save 10%. So the podcast is saving attorneys money at the end of the day.
And I will say that's good information because I want to check it out. All of those things are great because it's always to make it easy to understand, it's if then, right?
Right.
So if it's a single member LLC, right, and they choose single member, great. Then this paragraph that I've already drafted goes in. But if they choose multi-member, then we put the multi-member language in. And it's not like, it's not Chat GBT where it's just making junk up. As you start to build these things out, it makes it a big difference when you can say, these are customized solutions for you because we've drafted each and every one of these. Mm-hmm. It takes a little bit of work. That's the part that takes work. But when you have something like Gavel, you have something like Wealth Counsel, you have these platforms, they're all great because they do the job. And so what we're looking at is how we can implement that in-house just so that way we can control it.
Right.
It's a heavier lift than I thought it was going to. But we've used everything from Leap to, we've used 5 or 6 different platforms. We're still probably paying for all of them because we signed a longer contract. But we looked at it as, how can we bring this in-house so that way we're not worried about something breaking down. Mm-hmm. We're not worried about, something going offline. If we have a problem, it's in-house, which is great, but it just takes that heavy lift to do it. And the fun part is now with all of the, the GBT type stuff, that AI that's really coming out to the masses now, you have some abilities that you may not have had last week where we're implementing AI into some of our documents just to see what happens.
Right.
Sometimes it messes it up. Sometimes you go, wow, how did it know that? And until we figure that out, we want to make sure that we control everything. But you got to test it, right? You got to figure it out. And just like I always use the example, I teach law school. I teach sports law, shocking. And I always talk to our students that are, second and third year law students about what do you think a player contract looks like? And they don't know because that's why they're in the class. And they have a big collective bargaining agreement for players now. But when Babe Ruth signed his contract with the New York Yankees, right? He goes from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees. It's about a 2-page document because it was 1920. That was good enough back then, right? Typewriters and no whiteout. If they messed up, they had to crumple up the page, throw it away. And so 2 pages was pretty good, right? That was some top-notch Wall Street legal work. Mm-hmm. And now these contracts are 400 pages, but they all started back there on that, handshake type of a deal. For us, we're still, if you look at the contracts that we were doing on, say, WordPerfect for some of you, that's kind of the handshake deal from back then. It doesn't mean the documents are going to get longer. They're just going to get better. Right. And we have to implement all of those things that we can. So Gavel is going to be something I'm going to check out. I appreciate that. That's going to be good stuff.
Yeah. And when you're not billing your time, you're incentivized to, when something like generative AI comes out, to try it out. Because if you could streamline your processes even more, I mean, even if not from a law practice perspective, but from a marketing perspective, from making new copy for your website, like these are turning out to be incredible tools for that type of thing, which is still related to the business of law.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I'm an AI forward attorney as well.
Yeah, and the fun part is it doesn't cost anything to go look at those things. I like for this weekend, I have 14 of them that I need to look at, ranging from presentations that they're going to create a PowerPoint presentation for me just by typing in what I think it should be.
I've found that one too. I can't remember what it's called.
It's incredible.
Type something or
yeah. Everything from that to generating images, which we've all seen those funny images online of random stuff, or I saw one the other day of 400-pound superheroes. So it's like Batman that looks like the rest of us. And it's kind of fun when you take a look at these things and you think, wow, that's really cool. Just imagine what those things are doing though when it comes to the practice of law and marketing. Those type of things. Generative AI can do logos. They can, craft documents. They can do all sorts of stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're all 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. The all or nothing mentality that we all have just from the internet now. If you look at it from, it might get you 60 to 70% of the way there, but save you 3 hours.
Right.
Pretty good deal.
Right. I mean, and there are IP concerns, right? Like if a machine if machine learning makes it, is that protectable? Well, how much are you changing the first draft, right? Like, don't just stick with the first thing that it pumps out. And I caveat in the beginning, in the intro, nothing is legal advice, et cetera, et cetera. And that app for the listeners is called Tome, Tome. It's the AI powered storytelling format. It's tome.app. And it's on my list to check out and try to make a PowerPoint or make a slide deck from it. Very cool.
And those are the things that I may not use them. I may say, you know what, this just doesn't work for me. But the only way I'm going to find out is to actually try it out. If you're at a good sized firm right now, they're not going to have anything to do with it. You still got to use PowerPoint and stuff like that. But that's where I think the disruption comes from for a subscription model. Because the big white shoe law firms can't do it. Their model will crumble doing that. But our smaller firms have the ability to be really nimble and adjust to our client needs very quickly. So if you only work with, say, dentists, that's great. You can create a platform for them, especially if they're starting out, right? If a dentist is starting out, I don't know anything about the dental industry other than I'm supposed to floss.
I interviewed an attorney who runs a firm, Provider Legal, and he does subscription legal services for dentists and small medical practices. Yeah.
Amazing. I can see how that would totally work. Totally. Because if you're starting out your medical practice, I assume it's probably a lot like working with a young professional athlete. You have 15 things that need to get done. You have the templates that you want to give your client in order to track with HIPAA or whatever you do. And those are things where if you do it more than once, either record it or automate it. And oftentimes now what we're doing with clients is if we have a section that people are always asking about, we're going to record a Loom video and walk them through it. And we're just going to have that at our disposal.
Right, right. And not to try to convince you to change your line of work, but there is a built-in incentive in health law, right? Because like compliance, HIPAA, insurance, like you need legal help. Like if you're a doctor, you don't want to have to worry about legal stuff. You want to outsource that, right? Just like you were talking about, outsource your integrations. Well, athletes, business owners should outsource their legal too, right? And that's where the subscription model fits that very nicely. So, I mean, I'm looking at your website, and you've done a great job describing on like a high level your subscriptions. But like, do you have like set like prices, like an athlete who's in college, gets this much per month? If they're in their first 5 years of professional playing, like they're in this subscription level. Like, how do you set up your different levels of subscriptions, and what does that look like?
Sure, it's going to scare some people, because if we get to the player before they go professional, we will work on them at no cost. We defer the cost leading into, say, the draft. And the big thing with us is if you enter into the draft, remember in the NFL, only 300 guys are going to get drafted. It's not even that. It's 227 or so are going to get drafted. Of those, how many make a team, right? I mean, not many. And so our thing is that we're not going to charge you. We don't start that clock running until you make the team, which we got a game that just has buy-in for everybody, because there's some players we won't extend that to, because we're dealing with scouts, we're dealing with coaches. We know that, hey, you know what? Hey, we have this linebacker kid. What do you think? And they're going to say, yeah, he's an undrafted guy. He might be a practice squad player. Okay, well, then he doesn't necessarily need us, right? We don't necessarily need him. I don't need a practice squad player. That doesn't do anything for our practice. We can't charge him any money.
Yeah.
And so instead, if we have a guy that's going to be drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th round in the NFL, we'll take him on and we'll take that gamble, because what we look at for marketing purposes, no professional athlete's going to hire a lawyer from Instagram ads. That just doesn't work. Some other parts of our practice might, but the athletes themselves, they're not hiring us based on that. What they're hiring us on is that other guys in the locker room know who we are. And so if we have one of those football players that goes, oh man, I've been dealing with this guy, you should call him. I can't pay for that kind of marketing, but they're doing that when somebody that they trust you, and they have to really inherently trust you to be able to pass your information. And that recommendation is better than anything you could ever have. Better than YouTube, better than anything else, because players don't trust anything other than what other players tell them.
Yeah.
And so if you have one of these rookies saying, yeah, this is what my guy did for me, and oh yeah, you should talk to him. And I get a phone call. I've had some phone calls from people where I thought they were pranking me, and it's, no, some rookie gave me your number. Like, can we talk? Yes. Like, I don't care what I'm doing. I am canceling whatever I'm doing, because this Hall of Famer's calling me about setting up a kids camp. Yeah. And so we won't charge until we get to that stage. And then it's legitimately between $1,000 and $1,400 a month. We have some players that are a little bit below that, just because they don't need a lot of service. They just want to have a lawyer at the ready. And oftentimes what we tell them during the season is, we'll check in with your service providers. We're not going to give them any confidential information, but if I talk to your financial advisor, you might be talking to him about different stuff than me. And so we just do a group check-in of service providers, and we'll corral that, because we don't want the guy doing your taxes not in the loop with all your stuff. We want to make sure that we're all at least aware on who we have to contact for what documents. And it also helps us replace people if they're not doing their job, right? Yeah. We can't get a financial advisor on the phone for 6 months. It's probably time for you to get a new financial advisor.
Right.
And we just keep track of that. And that's the reassurance a lot of guys like more than anything else. It's not about the LLC or the font and the operating agreements. They like that we've walked them through that, but oftentimes it's just the check-ins, because we'll have guys talk about that they met a girl in Philadelphia during the season, and now they're going to say move in with her in Georgia. And I'm thinking, this kid's from Santa Monica. What's he doing moving to Georgia? And we're going to have those just life conversations.
Right.
And I'm going to, my questions are, is she the one? Like, what happens if you're not playing football? is she sticking around?
Bringing it
And
back to the legal advice side of it, which makes it protected attorney-client privilege conversations, which is extremely valuable. And I find that I have a lot of non-traditional conversations with my client. That's nice to be protected by attorney-client privilege, which is just that added value as a for clients who are subscribed. Now, if you're like when they hit a certain level, like do you have like other pricing? Like do you exclusively do the subscription pricing? Are there other flat fees in certain situations? You do hourly? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, we will do hourly for like negotiation stuff where we just can't pinpoint how much time it could take us. Oftentimes that typically will revolve in some sort of investment deal that they're going to do. Like if you're going to invest in, say, Wingstop restaurants, I don't know how long it's going to take us to figure that out with the local franchisee or with Wingstop. We're starting to get to a point with some of them where we think we can flat rate that. We'll flat rate some other stuff. Like if we're going to do a kids camp, that might be outside the purview initially. And okay, we will do that probably at cost for us, which is a few $100 maybe, just to get it off the ground. And then we'll do the management side of it after that if they want us to. Oftentimes they're going to put a family member in charge of it, but we will gladly work with that kids camp, whether it's a separate entity or not, just to make sure that stays up to snuff, because we've done a lot of them. Those kids camps are really easy for us, but it can be really difficult for your brother who just, he doesn't know how to run a kids camp. He's been through a bunch of them with you, but he doesn't know how to run the business side. And so we're going to teach him how to do that, maybe even replace ourselves, but that's the value that we provide. We're not buying a boat off of our, $1,000 kids camp.
Right.
And so some of that stuff for athletes, that's where it's going to be a value add more than anything else. Because again, we know what we're doing in a certain segment. Now, when it comes to us and they say, hey, I'm trying to get out of my lease because I got traded, hopefully they've listened to us and had an out clause in there. But if they didn't, all right, well, now we might have to go to an hourly setup for those type of things. But every step of the way, when it's outside the purview, we're going to let them know that. And we have yet, knock on wood, to have that conversation of, well, I thought this covered everything. No, it doesn't cover everything.
Right. I mean, when you're having ongoing conversations with your client because they're not afraid to call you or you call them because they're worried that they're afraid to pick up, you don't have to have those difficult conversations because you're building a good relationship and you're building rapport. It's interesting. Yeah, I would challenge you, and it sounds like you're challenging yourself to you could come up with a monthly price where if negotiations take more than a month, you're going to be happy with making at least X amount if it's done in a month, right?
And typically what we do with the younger athletes is we have a 3 or a 6 month commitment minimum, because otherwise they're going to just dump everything on you the first month.
Yeah.
But for the older athletes where they're coming towards the end of their career or they've just recently retired, because we're going to help prep them for that. We're not going to tell them if they're good or bad or they should or shouldn't retire, but we will certainly help them as they get towards that stage of their career, kind of help figure out what's next. So we can start that process and those wheels turning before they actually retire. We get them to a point where now that's going to go for a year, because we know that from the day you retire, you probably have 18 months before you feel like the earth is settled under your feet again. And so we want to make sure that we're there. Oftentimes those conversations aren't really about business. It's about figuring out what those rights and those sources of money are after the career's over. Introduce you to a disability lawyer who can help file those, post-career claims and do all of that, and just kind of manage some of those relationships, and then bring them back to, hey, remember when you said you wanted to go to veterinary school? Might be an idea. Or, hey, why don't we try and invest in a veterinary clinic? Or what if we take a look at? And we have those business discussions where honestly the spouses have been more than supportive, whether it's a male or female athlete. Their spouses are super supportive on them moving out of sports and doing something else. And it's really kind of fun to watch them re-engage and reanimate over something that's not their sport. Really cool stuff.
Right. So, I mean, I feel like we could go for like another hour. So I just have one more kind of substantive question for you, and then we'll start to wrap up. I feel like sports law attorneys are like unicorns. Like you go some people go to law school, they want to be a sports lawyer, and then they end up in insurance defense, like half the rest of their classmates, right? So actually talking to one, I do want to get it from the horse's mouth here a little bit, because it sounds like you are a business lawyer who happens to be really freaking good at sports law, and like that's the market that you're targeting. So like entertainment law in general, like what is that? Like what is sports law? Is it just like business law with some IP thrown in, a dash of antitrust, like what is it exactly?
I would tell you that it's a general practice, just happens to be that you have sports clients, because I've worked with teams, leagues, unions, players, referees, high school kids, high school athletic associates, everything in between. And all of it is, some of it's academia, the academic law, some of it's education, some of it's disability. It's just a wide ranging stuff. I just happen to be a business lawyer masquerading as a sports lawyer, right? It's just the branding of it. Because when we're doing LLCs, all right, anybody can have an LLC, right? But whether that person's on stage, doing Phantom of the Opera, or they're playing for the Detroit Lions, we're doing the same kind of work. It's understanding what those risks and rights are that they have for the job that they're performing, that they're not going to do forever, right? If we have an NFL player, I know that they're probably only going to play for 2.5 years, and then they're going to do something else, and they're going to be a washed up football player. I'm a washed up umpire, and that's okay, right? We all have, this is where we start from, and it's more the mentality than anything else, because I can tell a football player, no, man, that was stupid. And I can't say that to, say, a business owner of a dry cleaner, because they're going to be offended. The player is going to go, okay, well, so what am I supposed to do? Because they're the most coachable people on the planet. Right. But really, we're talking business, because I think business can solve a lot of the problems that they have when they will look at the world through that lens, rather than, say, spending all the money after they're done playing. They understand the economics of it, and they may not have all of the money that they ever made, but they certainly understand what it is as a utility, as an asset.
Right. The nature of your practice lends itself well to like a multi-jurisdictional practice. So how do you handle that from like a licensing perspective?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because we'll get calls from Florida, and they have, quote, no minimum contacts to California. So oftentimes what we do is we have the legal side where we go, look, I have an attorney that's licensed in New York. I'm licensed in California, and these are the places we can do the legal stuff. Now, we can help consult them on the industry itself and kind of the, hey, let us introduce you to some people. We can do a consulting agreement for some of that. It's not an attorney-client relationship. There's not a way around that, but it's, let us put you in touch with somebody like us, say in Florida. In, whatever your home state is, we think that's where you should probably do most of your work anyway. But, if you're a journeyman player, it's likely you're going to spend some time out here. And so we might be able to do it, but licensing is one of those scary things where, if you have LeBron James call you and you're a New York attorney, my God, you want to pass him up as a client? I don't want him as a client. He'd swallow me whole. But if I have somebody from, say, New York that does that, I might have to team up with them and do a joint representation.
Right.
And there's always ways to make that work, especially in today's connected age. You can find attorneys that are going to, especially with athletes, that want to work with them. And so I have that industry knowledge. If they have that local knowledge and we say, let's work on the operating agreement together, typically we'll write it and send it to them and say, hey, check this for local stuff, walk me through it, let me know what we need to know, and have them sign off on it and be the local counsel.
Well, I got to say, if anyone from Chicago reaches out to you, Brandon, reach out to me and let me know.
Absolutely.
And so we'll start to wrap. Just something I do want to point out to you and get your input on is I've had a lot of attorneys on the show, and I think you're maybe the fourth or fifth that's like a white guy like me who's challenging the status quo. Like the vast majority of attorneys who are disrupting the billable hour are women, attorneys of color, because these are attorneys that the system is not set up to support them, right? Yeah. But I've been trying to find a through line for why even people like you and me are also challenging the status quo. And you brought it up early on in the conversation, which was you're a first-generation attorney. Yeah. Right? So am I. Like, we don't have mom and dad lawyers or grandparent lawyers that said, this is how you do it, Sonny. So we were able to come at it with a fresh perspective. And we didn't go to elite institutions.
No.
So just sort of my like trying to inspire more people out there, in general, that like this is something that they can do, and like because obviously the law legal
100%.
professions, right? They failed women attorneys of color, so like this is a viable option for them, and they could follow in the footsteps of them, and as do I. But is the subscription model a way out of that broken legal system that doesn't support attorneys who are first generation or who don't look like you and me? Here's your chance to convince attorneys. Like, why is the subscription model the way out?
Well, I'll tell you, it's simply because I think the hourly model in general, not always, but in general, is an antiquated model. And for most people, the attorneys are the only people that we pay by the hour, right? We're not paying a heart surgeon by the hour. I don't think we are. You're not paying anybody else by the hour. You're paying them by the product or the service. And oftentimes, I think when you change the way a industry works, you're probably going to have a market because everybody's sick of every industry. And so, I'm sick of the auto mechanic, but I have yet to find anybody that does it any different.
Right.
And if those people that are going to revolutionize and shake things up and watch everybody at the Bar Association snicker at them and go, yeah, those are those idiots doing the subscription model. Those idiots with the subscription model are going to be around a lot longer, and they're probably going to have a lot more fun because they're going to have deeper relationships with their clients. And I think oftentimes people that don't look like us, they come from communities where community is everything.
Right.
And when community is everything, that means you're worried about everybody just getting through the day. You're worried about making sure everybody eats, whether it's you, your neighbor, somebody you don't even know. It's helping everybody get to school and just try and get up and out of the situation that they're in. That's awesome. We can learn a lot about that kind of a view of the world because I think as lawyers, that's what we should be doing, right? We're the most trusted, confidant professionally a lot of people should have. Right. We know all the secrets, right? We can't tell anybody about those secrets. And so I would hope that they're not looking at us thinking, I can't afford another 15 minutes. I'll tell them about that later. Mm-hmm. Instead, I think the subscription model lends to those communications and really helps anybody that wants to help people have a different way of doing that. The big law firm model is really good to pay back your student loans and just grind the gears, right? You just ride the bicycle of time for a real long time. But here, when you do a subscription model, that changes the dynamic because people are getting the value and the appearance of the value a lot more than they are just by the billable hour.
Right. And if you could get the business, you could scale much faster and better than with the billable hour, like you started this conversation with. So my actual last question for you, Brandon, is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
Hot dog is not a sandwich. Hot dog is special. Hot dog is a hot dog. There's a sandwich there, and a sandwich is a sandwich, but a hot dog is a hot dog. That's all there is to it. It's just different. It's a cousin of a sandwich.
Okay, they're cousins. That is a first. That is a first. I'll take it. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Good question. I'm all over LinkedIn. You can email me, firstname@mylastname.com. You can reach out anywhere online. You can give me a phone call, smoke signal, Twitter. I'm on Twitter, but I'd recommend LinkedIn though, or email is the best way to do it. And I'm always happy to collaborate, answer questions, talk any of it, because I work in one of those weird industries where everybody sees it on TV, but nobody knows everything about it. I just happen to know everything about it, and I don't watch it on TV anymore.
Yeah. And the LinkedIn video series that you have too. So if people want to see some of the stuff you've put out there, I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for coming on Law Subscribed.
Of course. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for sponsoring this show. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with someone you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.